Welcome everyone to the Ontology Summit 2022. Today we are having the synthesis session where we're going to try to synthesize the ideas of the first track of the Ontology Summit. So the topic is on, well, the general topic is pandemics and other disasters, but this first track is concerned with kind of general parameters of disasters. So let's get started. It's an open discussion. Please suggest ideas. And if possible, I would appreciate it if you would put things in the chat room so that we can get it recorded and ultimately use it for the summit communique. So,
yes.
Robbie,
Thank you, Ken. That's a good overall introduction of our synthesis session today. And we have had heterogeneous speakers, and we can discuss how many and what we learned from them. But whether we weave those thoughts into synthesis or in addition put our thoughts, we need to come up with what we can say about interaction of ontologies with disasters, role of ontologies, and what parametrics are of importance, and how we can sort and filter various aspects of life cycles of disasters, coupling among them. I have one slide that I was developing as we were talking that I like to discuss during our next hour deliberations. I request everybody to be focused, open-minded, and converge on the subject so that we can use your valuable comments towards our communique. Thank you. Please consider the floor open and raise your hands or whatever way we want to start discussion.
Do you have a few slides summarizing, or how are we going to do this?
I just was creating one that I can project right now and speak to the second slide that I was developing, if that is acceptable, unless others have a presentation. I don't have a presentation.
Because if you look at the summit, who led the, who are the chairs so far?
We have had Doug Leonard. We have had one extremely good knowledge graph paper, and we had one more paper, right?
So how many presentations you had, Ravi? You have about 4, I guess, no? Yeah. So if you look here,
this is the sort of the general background of the track.
Yeah. So you are the summit chair. Ravi is the summit chair for that. Not summit chair. Sorry, who's the track chair?
Gary and I both were, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess you had about the site talk, Mark Fox's talk, and the knowledge graphs talk, I guess. And then there was something about general disaster.
So these, yeah, you can see the 4 talks.
Yeah.
So
now also, and if you go down on the pandemics, there is a TBD on March. I mean, we decided on all the speakers there on the schedule. If you go down,
2nd March.
Because I need to follow up with them this week. That's why.
Actually, I'm a little bit out of tune, to be very frank with everybody and be fair. I have not had time to review before the synthesis session what all happened in the first track.
Well, I'm sharing the
Heterogeneous.
slides.
So this is a good time to review as Ken is helping us, guide us to do that. You have a valid question, Ram. But what about, before we get into that, yes, I'm interested in knowing if the next week's presenters are confirmed.
Yeah, we have confirmed all the presenters. I'm just looking at who are the presenters. Let me check, go to the Ontology Summit site. And
Of course, it's something we can discuss at the end of this hour.
I'm
as
surprised
well.
why we have like 09th pandemics and ontologies. We have, I think there's something wrong here. Wait a minute. Let's see, Lynn is the next week talk. And then, yeah, we have the speakers, but why did we say 2ED? But the title, that is Michael DeBolis and Datta did not give a title?
No, they haven't given the title, but they will speak. And they are not confirming whether they'll speak one on each day or they're just going to give one combined.
We have John
talk.
Beverly talking on this thing. So we have all the talks already scheduled. So
we need to reconfirm with them so that they are aware that they have to send us title, slides, and bio.
Okay, I will follow up on those. Okay, I will get to it. All the four. I'll work on it right after this. Okay.
Thank you.
You know, one issue that was right at the beginning was, is there a common agreement on the definition of disaster? This is what Gary put in the chat.
Yes. And then we had a little discussion on it, and I thought we went and said the UN definition or the US definition and so on, as we did the preparatory work before the summit. We said we would adopt, and for US you said the president decides what's the disaster, etc.
Yeah, that's not very ontological. Somehow it's.
Yes.
We would like a definition that is more objective. Isn't necessary to have someone's opinion. So how can we deal with this? Could we just collect together all of the definitions of disaster and somehow come up with a common basis,
Yes, that would be the best approach because having those multiple definitions, you'll be able to see the differences, if there are any, quite clearly. And if there aren't any, okay, then they're all equally good. But of course, the first place you start is the Oxford English Dictionary. And the free version of that is lexico.com. Or if you have a Mac machine, it's in the built-in dictionary, conforms to the Oxford English Dictionary. That is at least the lexical version.
So
I would just add something to that idea, since I introduced this in the chat. It would be valuable to look at ontologies to see if there are definitions in any of them for disasters, hazards, pandemics, and so forth. So, you know, we certainly can start with glossaries, especially if they're from a definitive authoritative source like the UN that's been working on this a long time. But it's also important to look at ontologies.
Very good.
Yeah,
Well,
what I did is
Gary, that
I
presumes
looked up
that
the word risk. Let's look at risk. That's related to disasters.
Yeah, hazards have risks.
Have risks. And the difficulty there is not so much that there isn't a common definition, but that there are actually many different kinds of risk. And the same word risk generally is used for all of them. So when you're looking at it,
risk is Yeah, but Kenneth, risk is a dependent notion, right? Both the risk to whom and the risk when, among other
Exactly,
things.
that's the problem. You see the word risk, you need the whole context in which it occurs in order to start getting some idea of what is meant. And even then, there's several possibilities.
Right. So I again would take a somewhat of Mark Fox's approach and others, which would look at level. So risk is sort of at the foundational level, and then you have a more specific level. In the case of what Mark Fox is talking about, overall city risk for public health events, and then you have another more specific thing, which is at the service level. In his model, how do you deal with particular things that services that are involved in maybe mitigating a risk? So he would be talking about things like water treatments and transportation and things of that nature. So I think the ontologies with a modular hierarchy approach start to address this, but we don't want to get hung up on the foundational level of forever trying to define risk. We rather look at it through this hierarchy as we get more specific. And so some of us would be interested in a particular like pandemic health risk.
Well,
So perhaps defining disaster is the wrong direction.
this is a Pandora's box.
Because it's a dependent notion, right, Todd?
Yes, but we ourselves
sorry,
have divided things up into pandemic disasters, environmental disasters, outer space disasters, and so forth. We've done a little bit of that ourselves, right?
Right. So there's,
Well, maybe you can just get along with a fuzzy definition or less precise. Maybe that's adequate.
Yeah, fuzzy definition, and to start at what Ravi's been calling for, a parameterized view.
Yeah.
One
Thank
could say, here are the factors that distinguish different kinds of risk, different kinds of disasters, and then see to what extent they can be put into modules or modules with parameters or defined hierarchically.
Why do you want to do that, Janet?
Well, that's what Ravi has been calling for, is a parameterized approach that that allows you to have a general model where you can call out different cases. So when Ken says, well, there are different kinds of risk, and you bring out the dependency, different kinds could be handled by identifying the parameters that distinguish the cases, which are the differentiae. And then the dependencies are another perspective that might need more of an architecture view with viewpoints and views.
Well, it sounds like you're outlining a program to develop an ontology for this notion disaster.
Right. Well, I thought it would
Yeah.
take an ontological approach to disaster and risk but as you said, you can start loose, but you don't necessarily want to stay loose. You can start loose and start collecting the factors that provide the structure that maybe one could aim toward.
Okay.
I mean, we did sort of
That
a
is the
similar thing when we
differentiator.
were trying to understand what an ontology was. We looked at parameters, in effect, the different characteristics that different ontologies had. So you could do the same here.
Well, one might ask the simple question of, given that we've had 3 talks at least, and we've had the launch, which had some talks, what are the parameters you would start listing based on them? We had one talk, for example, which is OGC, so that got at all the spatial things, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also know that there's the temporal aspect that Mark Fox talked about that. So space and time are these general things that are going to apply pretty broadly.
Well, but Gary, there's the initial distinction of what is the subject of the disaster. Is it a forest fire? Is it people? Is it infrastructure?
So, Todd, your comment is taking us into multiple dimensions of disasters, and it is important to understand that disaster word by itself does not mean much. It is in the context of which part of life cycle, who it is affecting. Does nature, do we care if there are 5 forest fires in an uninhibited forest where the impact is minimal and the fires are very small? And then we go to the regional fires that we are seeing. So look at any one subject, you got to look at the relevant parameters. How far away is it irrelevant? What parameters are important for that disaster? How it is coupled to subsequent disasters? How does it affect people? So these are all entities and relationships we have to worry about.
Mhm.
And then
It's quite large.
develop or use the existing ontologies to integrate them in a thread. So I like the approach Gary is suggesting, is at least have one cut based on that, our theme, ontologies.
Ravi,
Yeah.
another approach is to look at individual things that we might call a disaster. If you want to start with pandemic, that's fine. And try and find the differentia of those things, of that one particular disaster.
So where
then work on another one.
Where do we start or stop? Let's say, let us stay next
Oh,
couple of minutes
there's
on
never a place to
pandemic.
stop. Well, there's never a place to stop, but the first starting point is
Very
look at
good.
the definitions that are out there.
Yeah.
And for a pandemic, there might be more consistency, maybe. But again, then you can look at it at a hurricane, if you want to call that a disaster, which may or may not be. Are there any, Gary, do you have a list of well identified things that are labeled as disasters?
Well, I think we have a start on that. That's a fairly long
Okay.
list. But even within just environmental disasters, we've talked about floods and fires as a starting point.
The
Well,
pandemic knowledge
hold on then.
graph.
Actually, but hold on a second. That's interesting. You say a flood or a hurricane or a forest fire. Those are, if you like, events. And then you could consider, okay, well, here's an event. It has, in the case of these environmental things, they have some geospatial location. They have a temporal extent. They also have a geospatial extent. And then you could then ask, well, in that geospatial region, what other entities exist there? And if they exist in that region, are they subject to any sort of degradation because of the particular event that's occurring? And you can go from there. That's one way to do it. Because in that case, you
to
start
say that a
introducing some context.
wildfire is an event as opposed to a disaster is to get confused. It is both things.
Yeah.
Obviously, a disaster has events in it. And sometimes we just say
No,
that's a
but-
fire going on over there.
Right?
So, Todd,
So what,
I think-
yes, Gary? Yes, Ram.
No, Todd, you bring up something interesting, important issues, because here we have on one dimensional level, what are the various types of disasters or pandemics that you can consider. And then there's another layer where you're trying to abstract out that the pieces of information you talked about. I mean, there's an events, spatio-temporal, and these are the attributes that you connect somehow or other, or entities you can connect. So those are the abstractions that we could get out of the talks, presumably. I don't know. Maybe that was a goal.
Well, I wouldn't consider them abstractions. They're entities, and if it's a
They're
fire,
entities,
well, the fire is existing somewhere. So, but the point is to focus on those things that constitute the disaster, as opposed to the notion disaster.
Yeah.
That is build up this notion of disaster from all the things that are that we would consider constituting such a situation.
So do we
yeah.
create what would be the end goal of such a synthesis? Would it be to define disaster, to parameterize disaster, to say when a disaster is important, when it is not, and so on, or it is something?
Well, it will give, Ravi, it would give you a basis to quantify some of those interesting distinctions that people use to say, well, it is a disaster because blah, 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 blah. But again, I'm providing an ontological approach, not a relational database or an SysML approach. You know, what are the entities involved? What are their relationships?
Yeah.
And it's very different. It's very complicated, certainly.
So it's an
And for
relationship.
what purpose? For what purpose? That purpose, is it for a management agency? Is it for a funding agency? Is it for relief, actually seeing the effect of the relief on people and populations? How far away do you go?
It could be used for any of
tornado is a
those.
good example. Tornado affects a particular line or a swath width of 50 miles, and it covers sometimes 100 miles and sometimes 1,000 miles.
Yeah. So Ravi, on these things, what I gather, I mean, again, I didn't, whoever you organized the first part of it, you guys. So the thing is that you are now trying to, I call it abstractions, but you can call it anything you want. In terms of, you have all these disasters which are happening, like tornadoes, they all have a common theme. So you kind of extract the common theme out, and then for each one of those abstracts of the disasters you're talking about, there are particular things which are peculiar to only those particular things, and you kind of identify those things. So first you identify the things which are common, and second you identify the things which are specific to this particular disaster. Okay. So once you have done that, this is the first step that you go through it, and then you got to figure out what do you do with these kinds of information that you have created. So that might be able to help you to better manage the disasters. What is it going to do is the question finally.
Yeah, well, Ravi, you
Yeah.
asked what the purpose is,
Yeah.
Very
and
good.
I would say the purpose is communication.
So, okay, so you communicate about disasters.
Right. So
Management.
we're not attempting to get to the level where we're dealing with the disaster.
Yeah.
That would be too detailed. I don't think
So-
we're in a position to be able to do that.
So do we say that my biggest confusion in my own mind is there is a physics or computer or numerical model of disaster, especially let's say atmospheric disasters, that we can predict a little bit better these days compared to 50 years ago. And what is it? If we are able to sort out from that, then do we create, or there is already an embedded ontology because the model works? So how do we extract ontology out of it? For example, let us look at these big, huge supercomputer models of the atmosphere that the National Weather Service uses operationally. They are developed by NASA and NOAA for them. And so what do we do with it now with respect to disasters? Can we be specific and then contribute something in ontology using that? Or do we go the reverse way, collect all ontologies and attach them to some kind of physics of the model?
We can
So,
survey the ontologies. I mean, we can do a survey.
Yeah. So
Survey
Which
of
we did,
definitions,
which we
survey of
did,
ontologies.
and we did for pandemic, and we also did for a couple others, and then we had a paper before the summit was announced. If you remember, Ken, you took us through 3 steps. One was a list which had agencies like UN and UK and so on, Europe. And then we had a list of which ontologies we were able to discover. And then some of our speakers, especially, I forget the name, but the knowledge graph speaker took us to a lot of ontologies embedded in those knowledge graphs.
So Ravi, I think the key thing is you got to abstract out what you have, not abstract, but you got to summarize what has happened in the first, because we're talking about the summit. We're not talking about this topic in a general sense, because what have you gained from this talks? That's what you need to do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the topic was itself very general. So
that's okay, because here is what you can do. You can say that these are at one level, these are all the disasters. At one level, you can say these are all the parameters for any disaster that can happen. You know, you have events happening, you have a spatio-temporal kind of things, and so on and so forth. And then you can say to achieve this, you require some general ontologies like the psych they're talking about Doug Leonard talked about the common sense ontology kind of things. You require those. And I don't know, I don't know about this calling it top level ontology. That's probably the wrong word, but you can call it some generic ontologies that exist that can be applied to this particular domain. But here, the first step here is to identify those generic ontologies, which Doug Leonard talked about. I guess Mark Fox talked about some spatiotemporal kind of things. I was not there, and I don't know about the other one. So you can probably get these pieces of information and you can tie them up and create a story. That's what I'm saying.
Very correct. Very good. That is right.
And then individually and details of particular ontology for a particular disaster. I don't know, they may come later, like pandemics, people are going to talk about things. So that's okay. So I don't know about hurricanes or earthquakes. Has anyone talked about specific ontologies, which presumably they will be?
So is the culmination of, let's say, this synthesis session should result in a few paragraphs and a few lists of what we just now described?
Yep. They're not. There a couple of few paragraphs is what Ken has traditionally been doing.
And do we need to only focus on communique, or are we?
No, we are focusing only on communique synthesis right now, Ken, aren't we?
It's just the communique
Yeah.
right now.
We're not going to solve the general problem.
So that is where I think we need Janet and Todd or anybody else to say, how do we do a converging small manageable scope process rather than covering all the aspects of definitions and details of parameters? How do I, in my words, Janet or Todd, how do we select which parameters are important, and are we only going to take those for which we have had speakers or we have had our own discussions?
I think what Ram just outlined is a overview, and I think it's going to take iteration that you just start somewhere, maybe with other ontologies or with definitions, and look for patterns and go back and forth between those sources and the speakers, if the speakers themselves don't have definitions. But I think the goal is to have it converge by the time of the communique. So that's that should be feasible. Just set the goal of some good enough scoping of the factors, and something that could be shown in a diagram or a few diagrams in the communique.
Yeah, you could then go on and say, well, here's what else needs to be done. Open problems, if you like, given the complexity and the amount of detail that might be needed by different people, groups, organizations, or uses. Again, if we're talking about ontology development, there's never any, end point. The question is whether you've started out at a good place so that you can continue on if needed.
So are we going to divide the inputs for synthesis related document into a couple of us, Gary and me for certainly, but others who can volunteer are welcome. I have a question from some of the participants today. For example, Andrew, you are showing it like a slide. Do you want to project something or say something, Andrew?
I'm okay. Am I sharing?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Am I sharing something to the screen? I have the disaster event definition loaded.
Can you please share?
Yeah.
I will unshare. I don't know, how do I unshare? Good.
Go ahead and share.
I'm sorry, I don't see the. Oh, there it
Yeah,
is.
we start seeing your slide, but not fully yet.
I
Oh,
just
There it
had
is.
the,
wow.
Could you make the text larger?
yeah,
Okay, thank you. And what are we looking at?
just the definition of disaster event. I didn't mean to share if I did it by accident.
It is a series of like a code or a computer statement that we are seeing on the screen.
Yeah, this is a printout of the site definition of a disaster event.
It's a Sykes definition.
Yeah,
Talking about, it's like a Lisp-like structure, which says that
Yeah.
if you look at it, it gives out what I think it's it's common. What is it? Common logic representation. What is it?
Lisp, it is Lisp.
I don't think it's Lisp. It's some other representation here.
There's
think
psych.
cycle.
It
Pardon?
says psych,
Yeah, psych representation. What is psych representation based
It
on?
is
psych
Lisp.
L, psych L.
Cycle.
It's a language, yeah.
Yeah, so it's their own
Oh, I
language.
see. I thought it was Lisp that they were using.
No, they built it over Lisp at some time ago. I don't know what it is now.
Okay. So can we just take the green part and look at or somebody read it, because it is still too small to see.
Oh, okay. A specialization of emergency. Each instance of disaster events is a physical destruction event in which at least some of the objects destroyed or harmed are considered to be of significant value.
Could you kindly please copy that text and send us or put it on chat, because
Yeah,
it would help us converge on a common definition. That is where we started today.
okay. I'm going to stop sharing
So
then.
Yeah,
this
well,
is
the
one-
important point here is that given that it's in psych or some version of psych, like a public version, it's got connections to lots of other things. So it's a real model that makes it
Yeah.
really helpful because it sort of spreads out and laterally and also descends down into more specifics, I'm sure.
Very good. So these are the kinds of inputs that can go as a result of this synthesis session. The other approach that that I think Ram or Gary or someone suggested today is that we look at the presentation material of these speakers. We have actually had only 2 speakers, right? Psych is not specifically disaster related talk, but
It's got generic issues, yeah, general knowledge in there.
yes. So from these 3 speakers, we extract out whatever we can. And also our discussion leads to certain approach. So we adopt that and we at least create a couple of pages from which we can draw in the and a few diagrams, if possible, for the communique.
So what was in psych there just showed the dimensions that have already come up a few times, the complicating dimensions here, that there's a physical event that has a scope of impact on objects which are of significant value. And then that brings up the dependency question of value to whom and value over time, maybe. So one could start just from that skeleton of those statements from the psych definition, and it brings in these other dimensions that Ram and Todd have talked about.
Good comment. So what do we European and there was one Asian, ASEA and ASEAN definition as well. And these agencies are actually working on pretty good scale of disaster management. How do we bring that or do we bring in this synthesis, or we would worry about it at creating communicate kind of level?
Well, Robbie,
Yeah.
since this is supposed to be the first synthesis session and it's devolved into a discussion of how to represent disaster and the problems therein, what if we go back to what is it you want to draw out of the talks that have been presented, at least an outline, assuming that there's some common definition we could use to organize them and avoid the details at this point. What are those aspects of the various talks that you'd like to highlight, or at least identify at this point, whether we use them later or not for the communique or something else?
Yes, that is where Gary started, right, Gary? You started from ontology point of view, going in. And what Todd is suggesting is that we look at what each speaker said, extract out the nuggets or at least high points, and create a short document, which may or may not be used fully for the communique. Is that right?
Well, I would add, I mentioned leveraging some of Mark Fox's work, for example, as well as some of the framing we did in launch. I would just contextualize my discussion of definitions of disasters in ontology by saying, we started with what's the definition, and essentially what we are talking about here, I think, is looking at the semantic spectrum, starting at the bottom with just pure definitions that are human understandable, all the way to models, which we sort of struggling with here in the middle, all the way to ontologies, and disasters are represented in all of them. So I recommend taking a semantic spectrum approach to this, making sure that we leverage that concept, and then we can be more structured by leveraging some of the things that, for example, Mark Fox talked about. And I'm sure knowledge graphs also play a role. Everybody in discussing these things for practical purposes is trying to develop a knowledge graph so people can query it to be of use.
So the three talks that we had, one concentrated on pandemics, one on knowledge graphs, one on cities, and then the generic talk of psych. That is all we have had so far, right? But we had, as you are rightly pointing out, Gary, the preparatory work that we have done. We have lost Ram, is it?
No, I'm here.
Oh,
So
okay,
the question, the thing is that, at this level, you are now in the front end, like you are now exploring a theme, a framework for the rest of the summit. That's what it is. So you are laying the foundations for the rest of the summit. That is the first part of it, as I gather.
It's a good way of understanding what we are trying to say here today.
Yeah. So I know that what happened in your case is that it was not. It's kind of hard in a sense that to get all these themes in the right manner. Okay, because in terms of the flow of information, so you had Doug Lennett talking, you had Mark Fox talking, and all those things. And the key thing is for you to set up a story so that you can connect all this. Like as an example, I mentioned, like you can talk about the types of disaster, and you can talk about here are the things, abstractions that we want, events, and all the which Todd mentioned. And then that, I don't know, someone must have written about it anyway. And then you say, well, to make this actually happen, you need some fundamental concepts. And Doug Lennett and other people have talked about these fundamental concepts. And here is a summary of Doug Lennett's, here is a summary of Mark Fox's, and whoever else talked about it. That's the thing. And that would give you about a page or two.
One
You see-
thing I haven't seen about disasters is the upside aspects. I mean, forest fires, for example, are not all negative.
Yeah, but then Ken, that's a good point. But the thing is that you have to briefly describe in your initial write-up, in a sense, like in that paragraph, you can talk about disasters and you can start talk about positive versus negative thing. But then the summit is going to talk about what the speakers told.
Oh, no, I understand that. I was just remarking that none of the speakers seem to mention that.
So I would comment that there are wildfires and there are controlled fires, and you were talking about controlled fires.
Well, no, I mean, just in the general sense, there are certain plants that can only propagate as a result of fires, whether they're wild or controlled.
No, the key issue is
Right.
that the event of a
We
tornado.
we tend to focus on the risks, the downside.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it's just,
results can include natural results that are favorable to the
Very,
natural
very
environment.
correct. That is exactly what I was also trying to convey at one point, that things are happening in nature which have its own cycles. Magnetic pole reversals, desertifications, forest fires, regeneration of forests, etc. Before we made the planet so dirty that we have to worry about cleaning up some of the effects, all this has been happening for eons. So how do we separate what is naturally happening from what specifically affects us? Because we have started intruding into the coastal areas, into forests. We are living where we should not be living, leaving nature alone, etc. That's the environmentalist point of view. But the impact is in real world, there are people, they will get flooded. So what do we do? How do we manage the life cycle? But this is all a story. And how do we relate it to ontologies? And I think what Gary and Ram said just now, and I'm not singling out them only, what we said is making sense, that create some relationship of these and set a theme for rest of the summit too. And the communique, obviously, for that as well. I also want to take a minute and request if Doug Miles, or if Cass, you have any comments, this is a good time. We don't want to just keep talking and not
I'm just
involve.
listening, and it's been very interesting, and don't have any comments at this time.
Okay, Cass.
what we're looking for, Ravi, what you're basically asking is who would volunteer to write up such summaries?
Yes, good
It would
one.
be good if we spread this load out.
Yes,
So who would be willing to write up a short summary of one of the
my comprehension about some of the talks was limited, but certainly I would be one participant in that creation of document. I would like to volunteer, but not the only one.
Robbie, you're already
Yes,
had a lot of duties, and same with Gary and Ron. We're looking for other people to be involved in writing up these summaries.
Yeah, like I will have hands full for the pandemics thing. Which
No,
I need to-
you're
So
definitely.
yes.
I'm not asking you to volunteer. You are already very busy. I'm wondering if anyone else would be willing. So Doug, would you be willing to?
Well, I understood everything Doug Lynott was talking about, but trying to summarize it, I actually, did he make his presentation PDF? I'm sorry, his slides available, didn't he?
No, he did not. Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
And I don't think he will. You know,
I
not
don't
in-
think it will.
Well,
I was
yeah,
thinking if I send him an email saying I'm been tasked with writing a summary of your presentation, would you mind sending me your slides? Maybe he might. I don't know. What do you think? Or if someone,
Or Doug, you can tell him that if he wants you to summarize, he can do it. He probably has something already anyway, so he can send you the text.
right? Yeah, I mean, he could.
he has
probably,
asked us one
there's
thing
quite a
which
few
we have
summaries
to
of
do.
psych that are out there that I can pull from. But you know, if it was going to be a summary of his talk, I mean, I can just watch it again and take notes from it.
And I can help out with Doug Miles if you're going to do this.
And who's just volunteered?
Oh, that was
Doug?
Andrew.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. So Andrew and
But
Doug,
that's not addressing, that would be nice, but it's not addressing Robbie's and Ken's request there because that was not specifically on disasters. It was a really nice presentation. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
It's the other three that we're looking at here.
well, at least it is one beginning because we got 1/3 or 1/4 of the coverage between what Andrew and Doug will create.
oh, interesting. Yeah. So Andrew, if we summarize what psych, the information that psych has in its ontology about disasters, that might be useful.
That would be useful, yes.
Yeah.
But there was not much said, but there is a lot there. You know, those who know generic platforms like Psych, as you were able to extract out, I don't know how you extracted out the disaster information from Psych. So some of you have deeper understanding than certainly I have on the level of depth to which you can analyze Psych. And certainly microtheories are what he kept projecting as a pyramid diagram. And those can be used as a springboard to handle any kind of subject of disasters or anything else. So that tie-up would be great. It will at least covered 1/3 of the or 1/4 of the speaker's aspect, and we will take that and integrate with the rest 2/3 or whatever, which can just now outline.
Yeah, so if you could get that to us, the look for disasters, emergencies, and risk.
Yeah. Now we could just give a summary of what
Those three.
Psych, yeah, a brief of what psych has in it about disasters. Yeah, I mean, it can definitely be done.
Don't forget, also look at risk.
Oh, risks, yeah. As far as even the risk evaluation, it does have.
That's really important in disasters. Yeah.
Okay.
There is one action item due on me, and I don't know how to fulfill it. The request from Doug Leonard is that he gets a feedback on what all everybody commented on his talk so that he can come back to us for Q&A for follow-on presentation that he agreed to give us. So that precondition I'm stuck at, and Ken, I will look for your guidance on how we sort out from that session and give him a summary feedback.
Yeah. So you're saying giving him some feedback from that session would encourage him to come back, do some more talk?
We posted the discussion, so it's on the meeting page already.
But the problem is that I need to extract it out and send it to him as an email. We can't expect him to
It seems to me
that
the most
now.
Well, we can do that, but the other thing is there's also discussion here today, and there's something in the chat as well, right? So when I do the when I create the discussion for the meeting page today, I'll put this sort of site-specific, discussion together with the discussion during Doug Leonard's session, and then we can send that off to Doug.
Yeah.
So it seems to me the most critical question we might have for Doug concerns, how disasters, risks, hazards, and so forth are represented. What are the parameters, if you will, of disasters that are part of their model?
Hmm.
If he could talk about that quite a bit, I think it would be very useful for us.
Are we saying
Yeah, the event
specifically for
countries
Doug?
of their representation. Yeah, I mean, okay, so if like I've taken news articles like in the past and represented them in PsychL, especially even about disaster information by hand. Yeah, so what that looks like, that
So
representation.
for example, this discussion that we are having about psych is what excites Doug Leonard. If we can capture it and send it to him, then
Well, again,
there
another
is
way
a
of
like.
phrasing this is there a micro theory for disasters or micro theories of particular types of disasters? That would be great to know.
So I would
But-
say that after looking at his talk itself and comprehending how psych works, I think he would say, and then please comment if I am right in my understanding, he would say, pick out a few or one of my already existing micro theories and apply it to disaster as I have done for hospital application, as I have done for supply chain application. He would come back and tell us that.
Yeah, I think,
We only have 3 minutes.
okay.
Wow, sorry. It
We
took
have
us long
3
time
other
to warm up.
talks.
I was not prepared.
Yeah,
3 other talks. Who would
besides that.
be willing to try summarizing, say, the first one?
It looks to me like Gary definitely volunteers for Mike Fox's talk, right?
No,
Yeah,
Gary is already very much too busy already. We're looking for new people to work on this.
Very good, okay.
So we have the first talk with Josh and Paul, Josh Lieberman, Paul Churchyard. Is anybody willing to make a stab at summarizing what they talked about? The OGC disaster pilot. I'm sure it wouldn't be that hard. You just go through the slides and come up with, a paragraph.
If I'm not presenting later in this summit, I can do that, Andrew.
So you're willing to do that, Andrew?
Yeah, if I'm not presenting, I wasn't sure if I was presenting later or not.
Are
You
you
mean today? You mean today?
No, later in the summit, I wasn't sure if I had been invited to give a talk on the
Andrew, you
COVID-19.
have been invited only that particular day you were not available. So we're definitely interested in scheduling you as a speaker. Would you speak for full period or would you speak for only 30 minutes or what?
45 minutes.
Okay.
I have the presentation halfway done right now.
what date do you have it?
I don't have a date though. It was
Well,
sometime in
because
March.
his original schedule was disturbed because he was not available on that day.
This is Ramya. I have to go to another meeting at 1 o'clock, so excuse me.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
Ram. Thank you, Ram. Very, very, very great. Many great inputs. Thank you. And yes, Andrew, we have to schedule Andrew.
We do need to schedule you, yeah.
I have certainly in April some slots.
It's in the April timeframe.
Either see
Yeah.
one of the speakers has combined with the other. So for either April 13th, we will have one talk, or on April 20th, we will have one talk. So one
Okay.
of these 2 dates is definitely available for you. Can you
Perfect.
confirm, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm gonna finish the presentation for those dates.
Great.
And I would. I'm sorry,
Cass?
Hello. I would be willing to do that, but I wasn't actually present at that first one. So I'd be happy to do that, but what, is there a video that I could possibly draw from as well as the slides?
All of the sessions have videos, and all
Wonderful.
of them have slides except Doug Lennox.
Okay, and are those posted on the Ontolog forum already, or?
It's all on the wiki, session pages for the sessions.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Then yes,
So just go there, there are links, you can get to everything there.
okay.
They've been viewed a lot, actually. It turns out Doug Lennox's talk has been viewed over 1,000 times.
Oh, please, this is what he wants to know. Ken.
Oh yeah, it's really getting up there. I don't know if it's between 1,000 and 2,000 views already.
Wow.
Wow.
I haven't
What
done
are the
any
others?
study of.
Let's like say the first session, what's its view level at? I don't know if this is recorded. I can turn off recording, I guess, but. Oh yeah, so what would be, what are the views like on an average session, like say the first or second session? Is it not near 1,000? Is it 500?
No, it won't be
Other
1,000.
sessions are in the hundreds.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's pretty cool.
There are some sessions where they get into, I guess, almost 10,000,
Mhm.
something like that.
But so far this year, there's in the hundreds, and his exceeded.
Hundreds, and his is in the thousands.
Yeah.
A little over 1,000.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are a lot of views of these sessions. So yeah, they're available, Cass. So would you like to summarize that first session then?
I would definitely be willing to try.
Great, thank
Very
you.
good.
Janet, would you like to try one?
Sorry, no, I don't have time to do this. I'm trying to write a little summary in the chat from what I've been hearing, but
Oh yeah, by all means. do
Summarizing
something.
this session.
Yeah, go ahead, sure. Okay, and then I'll start looking for some other people who can do the remaining two sessions.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so we should adjourn today. And next week we start with pandemics.
Thank you so much,
Awesome.
everyone. And thank you, Ken, for continuing to lead and guide. And thanks to everyone for participation.
Yeah, so I'll be